Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing how to run MASM files with EasyMASM. Now there are two main ways to do this. You can install and run MASM files locally on your computer, and depending on whether you have a Windows, Linux, or macOS system, the instructions are going to be a little bit different. Or what you can do is use an online IDE like GitHub Codespaces to get up and running. And in this video, I'm going to show both ways of doing it. So firstly, I'll share how to get it running locally. So the first thing you're going to want to do, obviously make sure you're on the GitHub page, and you're going to want to grab the URL to clone the GitHub repository. Now, of course, you'll need Git installed for this. If you don't have Git installed, then obviously install it. Alternatively, if you want, you can download the zip. But really, if you're a developer and you're uh, developing software in some way, you really should have Git installed, so you may as well install it anyways. So you can go up here to the code, and where it says HTTPS, that's fine. We can copy that URL to our clipboard. And now you're going to want to open up a terminal. So here I am in my PowerShell. And so if you're a Windows user, git clone and then the URL and give it a minute, and it's going to download all the assets that we need. And what we're going to do is cd into that directory, and then all we have to do is actually run the script, and it should assemble, link, and execute a sample file for you. So let's do /run source. And you got to make sure that you have this exactly right. We hit enter, and you'll see a bunch of stuff that you really don't need to worry about. And this right here is showing you that you did it correctly. Now I'm going to switch over to a Linux terminal, and the steps are very, very similar on Linux. So the first thing that you got to make sure before you do any of this, if you're on a Linux system, is obviously you should have Git installed, right? Same as before, but you should also have something called Wine installed. So Wine is a program that we use to run Windows-based applications on Linux, right? So assuming you have Wine installed, and if you are a Linux user, I'm going to assume you know how to install Wine on your system. Assuming you've got Wine and Git installed, we can do a git clone, and then that same URL, and cd into it. And now before we did this /run source, we don't want to do that. What we want to do is /run .sh source. And you can see we've got our message here. Now, when you do run this, you may run into what looks like some errors or some weird messages, and that's all fine. You don't need to worry about it. It's just Wine being Wine. Um, you know, these things aren't made to run on Linux, so you may run into some weirdness there, but it should work pretty much exactly the same as on Windows. So that's that. Now, to give you an overview of what exactly happened here and how to exactly, work with EasyMASM in your projects, what I'm going to do is open up VS Code in this EasyMASM directory, and I'll pull this over. And you're going to see a bunch of files and a bunch of scripts, which I'll go over very quickly. So we have our README, which is just the thing you were reading on the GitHub page. We've got some scripts. Run Docker, you don't need to worry about that. Run.sh, that's what we ran on the Linux system. And then run.bat, this is what we ran when we were running EasyMASM on Windows, right? So this is just a script file that does a bunch of fancy stuff so that you can run an assembly file. Rest of the stuff you don't have to really worry about other than this src directory. So this is where all of your assembly files are going to go, right? So you'll see we have this source.asm, and this is the file that we were running earlier, right? So you'll see here, and if you're not familiar with assembly yet, that's fine, don't worry about it. But what we were essentially doing is calling this dump regs procedure here. So if we open up our terminal and do the same thing as before, /run source, you'll see it does this, right? That's the call dump regs. So if we copy and paste it so that now it's 3 times, if we run it again, you'll see it's displaying 3 times, right? So that's how you can, edit the file and run with changes. But what if you want to do different files, right? So what if, you want to have one for assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, whatever you want, right? Well, you're going to want to make sure that all of your files are in this src directory because that's where we're going to actually, that's where EasyMASM expects all the code to be. So let's copy the source.asm and let's call it something like a1.asm, right? And let's say assignment 1 is just to call it twice, right? So we've got call dump regs twice. Now we can run it again and you'll see, hold on, it's 3, right? That's because we're still running the source file, right? That's what the source is for. So if we want to run a1.asm, we want to write /run a1. And you'll see, just as we expected, it runs it twice. Now, if there's an error in your code, so let's say it's just dump R, which shouldn't exist, then we can probably expect it to error out a little bit. And as you can see, when we did this /run, we'll see a1.asm error on line 24. And if we go to line 24, we can see the error. So we can delete this and run it again. And there we go. So that's about it for getting up and running on Linux and Windows. Similarly, we opened up VS Code here. If you're on Linux, same thing. You can do a code dot and it'll open up VS Code same way for you. So all that's the same. If you're a macOS user, you have a couple of options. You can use this run docker.sh and it should work for you locally. However, I don't necessarily recommend this method because the Docker image is very heavy, right? So it's going to download, over gigabytes worth of stuff just to run EasyMASM, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best option. So in this case, I would recommend using GitHub Codespaces, which should work no matter what system you have. And we'll be going over that in just a minute. Firstly, though, I just want to show if we do MASM in the extensions, you can see there's a few different extensions here. This one here, MASM by Blind Tiger, gives pretty decent syntax highlighting, which should help. That's just a little thing. But going back to this, assuming you have a GitHub account and you've logged in, you can actually run a web-based version of VS Code called GitHub Codespaces, and you can use that to run EasyMASM online. So, the way we can do that is first to copy the URL, and then we're going to go up here to this create new, and we're going to hit import repository. So we go here, we're going to paste in that URL for EasyMASM. And what are we going to call this? Let's call it EasyMASM is cool. And you can call it whatever you want, right? And the reason why we're importing a repository like this is so that you can have a safe place to keep your code without it being public. So we're going to want to put this to private so that if you're using EasyMASM for, your homework, assignments, whatever, that it's not public online. The alternative, what you might think to do is to fork it, which you could do, but if you do that, then it'll be public, which you probably don't want, right? So let's hit begin import, and it's going to take a few seconds to a minute just downloading all the code and adding it um, to your own new GitHub repository. And a lot of times if we refresh it, it should just work. Or we can give it a minute. All right, so that took about a minute or two. You should see a message like this: importing complete, your new repository, blah, blah, blah is ready. So let's click on the link, and you don't need to worry about this stuff. What you can do now is, and you'll notice, this is your own new GitHub repository on your own account, right? And what you can do is hit the code button, and previously we used this to grab the URL, but what we want is to hit the Codespaces tab and hit create Codespace on main. And so now what this is doing is setting up an online version of VS Code with access to a full Linux terminal and a bunch of other cool stuff. And with that, you'll be able to run EasyMASM, all your MASM files online without having anything installed locally. Now, this may take a couple minutes when you first start it up, and this is just because, it's a Docker image, that same Docker image I was talking about earlier. It's pretty heavy with a lot of dependencies and whatnot, so sometimes it takes a while to load up. So be patient here, it may take a minute or so. All right, so that took about another minute to load up, but if you've been patient and you clicked all the right buttons and stuff, you should be seeing something similar to this. And what you'll notice is that it looks the exact same as our VS Code before. The only difference, as you can obviously see, is that this is not VS Code, this is an online version, right? So the first thing we're going to want to do here is run our /run.sh source. And actually, I will zoom in a little bit just to make everything easier to see. And this is exactly what I mentioned before about using wine. You'll see a bunch of stuff that looks like stuff is going wrong, but that's just wine being wine. If you notice below, we've got our normal dump regs and everything is working fine. So run it again and again. See, you'll notice a lot of things that look like errors. You don't have to worry about that. We've got the expected behavior here. So src, our source.asm, and we can copy it 3 times like before, run it, and you'll see we get what we expect. Now, that's about it for what you need to know to get up and running and working with Codespaces and with EasyMASM. However, one thing you should know is that while Codespaces is free, there is a limit to how much you can use it for free on a free GitHub plan. So my recommendation, if you just close this, right, and say you refresh it, if you go back to code and Codespaces, you'll notice that it's still active, right? And Codespaces will automatically delete, but it takes about 30 minutes, I believe, by default before they delete automatically. So depending on how much exactly you have of free usage a month, you may run into issues if you keep creating new Codespaces and whatnot and not manually deleting them or stopping them. So yeah, you'll see this Codespaces auto delete. So you can delete it or you can stop it. Stopping it will shut it down so that it's not using any resources anymore. But that's just something to note. Now the other thing, and we're going to open this up again, is we've made a change here to one of the files, right? But if we go back to our GitHub, repository and look at the SRC, you'll notice those changes haven't been made, right? And that's because we need to save those changes in Git and push them to our repository to have everything sync. So I'm not going to go over exactly everything Git related that you need to know, but realistically, you should take some time and learn the basics of Git so that you can make sure all your schoolwork is, safely online. To give you an example though, say we want to be able to save this, right? There's a couple avenues we can do it. You can use the terminal. I'm not going to be showing that here because some people are afraid of the terminal. But if you go to the source control tab on the left, you can see all the changes you've made that you haven't saved yet, right? So you can see here, it'll show you exactly what changes you made to this file. And, if you want to save those online, then you're going to have to do that manually. So what we do is we stage the changes so that Git knows that we want to save the changes we made to that file. Then we say, give it a message so that we know, we can look at a message and be like, okay, this is what we did when we made those changes. So say, call dump regs 3 times instead, right? Something like that. Then we can hit commit, and that's saved the changes, but it hasn't uploaded it locally or online yet. So now we just hit sync changes, hit OK, and now when we go here, once we refresh, we'll see it'll be 3 times, right? And the same thing, if we made like an assignment 1 and say A1 was to, okay, I don't know what happened there. Say A1 was just to call it once, right? And let's run it. You'll see it runs it once. Same here, we want to save our changes. So we hit stage, we say finished A1, commit it, and sync it. And now when we go back to our repository, we'll see our a1.ism listed here. So now let's assume we're done so we can close Codespaces and go back to our repository. And you can even see our finished A1 there. We can go back to code on the Codespaces tab, hit these 3 little dots and hit delete. That's going to delete our code space so that we're not using up any more resources that we don't want, right? And if we refresh it and go back to Codespaces, we'll see that our code space isn't there anymore, right? Last thing, really quick, if you go to this website, which is linked in the EasyMASM GitHub repo, you'll see a lot of these instructions and information is laid out online. You can see, very quickly how EasyMASM works. Things like Codespaces, Windows, Linux, MacOS, where we show how to, use Docker, all that fun stuff. Some troubleshooting, there are common errors that you may run into, and all that fun stuff.